The silver ships descended through the clouds like gods coming down from heaven, and the world held its breath as they broke through the atmosphere and hovered above the great cities of Earth. New York, Beijing, London, Mumbai, and a dozen others all witnessed the same impossible sight at the same moment. And billions of humans looked up at the sky with wonder and fear mixed together in their hearts. High Emissary Torvan stood at the viewing window of his command vessel and watched the blue planet beneath him with a sense of deep satisfaction. For he had done this many times before, and he knew exactly how this story would end. The primitive species would gasp and cry and fall to their knees in gratitude. And another world would join the great Volanth collective. The collective had existed for over 12,000 years, spreading across the galaxy like a benevolent tide that lifted all boats. They had discovered 63 species struggling in the darkness of ignorance, and they had raised each one up into the light of civilization, giving them technology and protection and purpose in exchange for their loyalty and their resources. Torvan was proud of this legacy, and he saw himself as a bringer of hope to backward worlds. His advisors had studied humanity for several months before making contact, and their reports painted a familiar picture. Here was a species that had only recently discovered faster than light travel, their crude warp bubbles barely capable of reaching the nearest stars, their ships held together with redundant systems and desperate engineering that spoke of a people who did not yet understand the elegant simplicity of true space travel by collective standards. Humanity was at least 3 centuries behind, perhaps more. Their weapons were primitive kinetic devices that threw metal projectiles through magnetic acceleration. Their power sources were inefficient fusion reactors that wasted more energy than they produced. And their greatest warships were tiny things that a single Volanth cruiser could destroy without effort. It was almost sad. Torvan thought how proud they seemed of their little accomplishments. The formal first contact ceremony took place in Geneva, where the United Earth Council had gathered to receive the alien delegation. Torvan descended from his shuttle in robes of shimmering white, flanked by his guards and advisors, and he spread his 4 arms wide in the traditional gesture of peaceful greeting. "People of Earth," he said, his translator converting his words into 100 human languages simultaneously. "I bring you greetings from the Volanth Collective, the greatest civilization this galaxy has ever known. We have watched your first steps into the stars with great interest, and we have come to offer you a gift beyond measure, the gift of our guidance and protection." The human leaders sat in their chairs and listened with expressions that Torvan could not quite read. He was used to tears of joy at this point, or at least gasps of amazement. But these humans simply watched him with careful eyes and took notes on their primitive electronic devices. Admiral Chen Weilin sat among them, a small woman with gray hair and a face that revealed nothing. She was the commander of something called the United Earth Defense Force, and Torvan had been told she was important, though he could not imagine why a species this primitive would need a military leader at such a historic moment. Torvan continued his speech, explaining the many benefits of joining the collective: protection from hostile species, access to advanced technology, membership in a galactic community that spanned millions of worlds, and the opportunity to contribute to something far greater than any single planet could achieve alone. "In exchange," he said, "we ask only that you accept our guidance in matters of governance and resource allocation. We ask that you contribute your fair share to the collective's great works. And we ask that you open your world to our advisors, who will help you transition into your new role among the stars." He paused, expecting the humans to erupt in celebration. Instead, the woman called Admiral Chun raised her hand like a student asking a question. "High Emissary," she said, her voice calm and measured, "what exactly do you mean by guidance in matters of governance?" Torvan blinked his 6 eyes in surprise, for no species had ever asked such a question at this stage. They were usually too overwhelmed by the wonder of it all to think about details. The collective has vast experience in managing the affairs of many worlds, he explained patiently. And we will help your governments make decisions that benefit not just Earth, but the entire collective. It is a small thing to ask in exchange for so much. And resource allocation? Another human asked, a man with dark skin and worried eyes, who was apparently the Secretary General of something called the United Nations. Your planet has many valuable resources, Torvan said, and the collective will help you extract and distribute them efficiently. Some will go to support the great works of the collective, of course. But your people will benefit tremendously from the improved technology and methods we bring. The humans exchanged glances that Torvan could not interpret. And then Admiral Chun spoke again. What happened to the other species you have uplifted? She asked, and something in her voice made Torvan's scales prickle with an unfamiliar sensation. Are they happy with this arrangement? They are grateful beyond measure, Torvan said firmly. And they serve the collective with pride and dedication. In time, your people will feel the same way. The humans asked more questions, uncomfortable ones about sovereignty and autonomy and the specific terms of integration. And Torvan grew impatient with their failure to understand their good fortune. Did they not see what was being offered to them? Finally, he raised his upper hands in a gesture of closure. I understand that this is much to absorb, he said, and I am prepared to be generous. I will give your people 1 solar year to prepare for integration, to say goodbye to your old ways and embrace your new future as members of the Volanth collective. He smiled, showing rows of small teeth. 1 year from today, we will return to formalize the treaty, and humanity will take its rightful place among the stars. I suggest you use this time wisely. He turned and walked back to his shuttle, confident that he had handled the situation perfectly. These humans were more stubborn than most, but they would come around eventually, for they always did. As his ship rose back into orbit, Admiral Chun watched it go with an expression that none of the Volanth had understood. It was not wonder or fear or gratitude that burned in her eyes. It was calculation, and deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, in facilities that no alien sensor had ever detected. The real work of humanity continued in 3 shifts around the clock. Building and preparing for a future that the Volanth could not imagine, the countdown had begun. In the months that followed first contact, the Volanth established their presence around Earth with the confidence of those who had done this many times before. They built 3 massive guidance stations in orbit, gleaming citadels of silver and crystal that could be seen from the ground on clear nights. And they sent hundreds of advisors down to the surface to help humanity prepare for integration. The guidance stations were marvels of alien engineering, each one the size of a small city and staffed by thousands of Volanth workers. They served as command centers, communication hubs, and visible reminders of the collective's vast power. And every human who looked up at the night sky could see them shining like new. Stars High Emissary Torvan was pleased with how smoothly everything was proceeding. The humans had accepted the presence of collective advisors without resistance, allowing them to tour their cities and factories and military installations with an openness that seemed almost naive. His advisors spread across the planet, mapping infrastructure and cataloging resources and assessing the strength of human defenses. They visited shipyards and weapons factories and military bases, and everywhere they went, the humans treated them with polite hospitality. The reports they sent back were reassuring in their consistency. Human technology was even more primitive than initial surveys had suggested. Their military forces were scattered and disorganized, and their weapons were laughably inadequate by collective standards. They still use kinetic projectiles, one advisor reported with amusement, throwing metal with magnetic fields like children playing with toys. Their most powerful warships carry fusion warheads that could barely scratch the paint on one of our cruisers. They have no energy shields whatsoever," another added. "And their fastest ships can barely manage a factor of 12 past light speed. At that rate, it would take them a century to cross from one end of collective space to the other." Torvald smiled at these reports and congratulated himself on choosing such an easy target for his next integration. Some species resisted when they learned the true cost of joining the collective. But these humans seemed too backward to even understand what was happening to them. But not everyone in the Volanth delegation shared his confidence. Junior analyst Kethra was young by Volanth standards, barely 200 years old, and this was her first integration assignment. She had been given the tedious task of analyzing human behavior patterns and social responses, the kind of low-level work that no senior advisor wanted at first. She found the humans fascinating in their strangeness. They were warm-blooded mammals with only 2 arms and 2 eyes. Their lifespans were tragically short, and they seemed to feel emotions with an intensity that other species found exhausting. But as the months passed, Kethra began to notice things that troubled her. The humans were too calm when the Volanth had integrated the Kethvari 3 centuries ago. Those people had wept with joy and overwhelmed advisors with questions about technology and culture and the wonders of the galaxy. When they had brought the Morith into the fold, that warrior species had raged and demanded tests of strength before accepting their place. But the humans did neither. They simply listened and nodded and asked polite questions. And something about their politeness felt wrong. Kethra attended a meeting where collective engineers demonstrated the principles of their faster-than-light drives to a group of human scientists. She expected the humans to be amazed by the elegant simplicity of Volanth technology. But instead, they studied the diagrams with the careful attention of students who already understood the lesson. One human, a woman with wild gray hair and bright eyes, asked a question about the harmonic frequency of the drive's containment field. "That is a very technical question," the Volanth engineer said with surprise. "And the answer is quite complex." "I understand complex," the woman replied with a small smile. The engineer explained. And Kethra watched the human's face as she absorbed the information. There was no wonder there, no amazement at secrets beyond her comprehension. Only the quiet satisfaction of someone confirming what she had already suspected that night. Kethra submitted a report expressing her concerns. "The humans are not behaving like a primitive species," she wrote. "They ask too many technical questions about our shield harmonics and communication arrays, and they show no surprise when we explain advanced concepts. I believe they understand more than they are revealing." High Emissary Torvald read her report and summoned her to his office. "You are young, Analyst Kethra," he said kindly, "and you have not yet learned that different species process amazement in different ways. The humans are simply quiet in their gratitude, and their scientists are curious by nature. There is nothing suspicious about asking questions." "But High Emissary," Kethra pressed, "they toured Guidance Station 3 last week, and they spent hours examining our power distribution systems. Why would a primitive species care about power distribution?" "Because they are eager to learn," Torvald said with a dismissive wave of his upper hands. "And we should be pleased that they are so interested in our ways. It will make integration much smoother." He sent her away with instructions to focus on her assigned duties and stop wasting time on paranoid speculation. Obeyed. But she could not shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong meanwhile. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in facilities that existed on no official map and appeared on no sensor scan, humanity's real work continued. The Pacific Deep Station was carved into the ocean floor 3 kilometers below the surface, shielded by layers of rock and water and materials that absorbed every type of sensor the Volanth used. It was here that the United Earth Defense Force built its true fleet, ships that bore no resemblance to the primitive vessels. They had shown the aliens Admiral Chen Wei-lin walked the corridors of the station with General Marcus Stone, her second-in-command, and they reviewed the progress of the past 6 months. The analysis teams have finished decoding their shield harmonics, Stone reported. We can tune our railguns to the exact frequency needed to punch through with minimal resistance. And their communications? Chen asked, cracked 3 months ago. We have been monitoring every message between the guidance stations and their home fleet. They think we are children, Admiral, and they are not even trying to hide their plans. Chen nodded without expression. She had expected nothing less. What about the Kethra problem? She asked. Stone frowned. The young analyst? She's asking too many questions and noticing too much. Our behavioral teams recommend we act more amazed when Volanth demonstrate technology. Tuo put her suspicions to rest. Do it, Chen said. We cannot afford to tip our hand before we are ready. They entered the main construction bay, and Chen looked up at the ship that dominated the massive space. The UEDS Defiance was nearly complete, a warship twice the size of any Volanth cruiser, armed with weapons that existed only in Volanth theoretical journals, and powered by engines that could cross the galaxy in days rather than years. How long? She asked. 3 more months for full operational capability, Stone replied. By integration day, we will have 17 capital ships ready, plus 400 support vessels. Chen allowed herself a small smile. The Volanth had given humanity 1 year to prepare, and humanity had used every single day. They thought they were studying us, she said quietly. But we have been studying them for far longer, above the Earth. The Volanth guidance stations continued their work, confident that everything was proceeding according to plan. They did not know that every tour, every demonstration, every answered question had given humanity another piece of the puzzle, and the puzzle was almost complete. Integration Day arrived on a bright spring morning, and the Volanth had prepared a ceremony worthy of the occasion. Dignitaries from across the collective had traveled to Earth to witness the formal absorption of humanity into their great civilization, and High Emissary Torvan had rehearsed his speech until every word was perfect. The ceremony took place in the same hall in Geneva, where first contact had occurred 1 year before. But now the room was decorated with Volanth banners and symbols of the collective, and hundreds of alien observers filled the galleries to watch the historic moment. Torvan stood at the podium in his finest ceremonial robes, his 6 eyes shining with pride and satisfaction. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the Integration Treaty, a document that would bind humanity to the collective forever. The human delegation entered the hall with quiet dignity, led by Admiral Chen Wei-lin and the other members of the United Earth Council. They took their seats facing the podium, and Torvan noted with approval that they had dressed formally for the occasion. Today marks a new beginning for humanity, Torvan began, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. For 1 year, you have learned about the collective and its ways, and now you are ready to take your place among the stars as our newest members. He gestured to the treaty on the screen behind him. This document represents your future protection, technology, prosperity, and purpose beyond anything your species has ever known. All you must do is sign, and the galaxy will welcome you as brothers and sisters. He turned to Admiral Chen with an expectant smile. Admiral, as the representative of Earth's military forces, you have the honor of signing first. Please step forward and add your name to history. Chen rose from her seat and walked slowly toward the podium, her boots clicking against the polished floor. The room fell silent as she approached, and every eye watched as she stopped before the treaty and looked down at the document that would surrender humanity's independence. She studied it for a long moment, and then she looked up at Torvan with an expression he could not read. High Emissary, she said, her voice clear and steady, on behalf of the United Earth Council and the people of Earth. I must inform you that we will not be signing this treaty." A murmur of confusion rippled through the alien observers. Torvald laughed, certain that his translator had malfunctioned. "I apologize, Admiral, but I do not think I understood you correctly. Would you please repeat what you said?" "I said we decline," Chun replied. "Humanity is not interested in joining the Volanth Collective, today or ever." The murmur became a roar of shocked voices, and Torvald felt his scales flush with a heat that was equal parts anger and disbelief. In 12,000 years of collective history, no species had ever refused integration. "You cannot decline," he said, his voice rising. "Integration is not optional, Admiral. Your people have no choice in this matter." Chun's smile was thin and cold. "There is always a choice, High Emissary. You simply assumed we would make the choice you wanted." "This is absurd," Torvald sputtered. "You are a primitive species with no significant military capability. Your ships are toys, your weapons are antiques, and you have nothing that could possibly threaten the collective. If you refuse to integrate peacefully, we will be forced to take more direct action." "I was hoping you would say that," Chun replied. She raised her hand to her ear, touching a small communication device that the Volanthi had dismissed as primitive human. "Technology, Admiral Chun, to all stations," she said calmly. "Execute Protocol Prometheus." For a moment, nothing happened, and Torvald almost laughed at the pathetic gesture. What could one tiny human do against the might of the collective? And then the alarms began in orbit, aboard Guidance Station 1. Senior Commander Velkoth was enjoying the ceremony on his display screen when his tactical officer let out a sound of pure terror. The commander turned to see the sensor display, and what he saw made his blood turn to ice. Space itself was tearing open at 17 different points around Earth. Reality split apart as massive wormhole apertures appeared from nothing. They were stable and controlled in ways that should have been impossible, their edges crackling with energies that Volanthi science could not explain. And through those apertures came ships, human ships, but not the primitive vessels the collective had surveyed. These were monsters of war, armored leviathans bristling with weapons that existed only in theoretical journals and powered by engines that burned with the light of captured stars. The UEDS Defiance emerged first, twice the size of any Volanthi cruiser and built like a fortress designed for one purpose: destruction. Its hull was plated with materials that reflected no sensor beam, and along its sides ran rows of weapons that made Velkoth's heart stop in his chest. Railguns, magnetic accelerators capable of launching projectiles at velocities approaching the speed of light-energy weapons, directed plasma arrays that could cut through the strongest Volanthi armor like a hot blade through water missile batteries, hundreds of launch tubes loaded with warheads that burned with the unmistakable signature of antimatter. And behind the Defiance came 16 more capital ships, each one a match for the collective's finest cruisers, surrounded by hundreds of smaller vessels that moved with the precision of predators hunting prey. Back in Geneva, Chen's smile grew wider as she watched the color drain from Torvald's face. "For 1 year, you studied us," she said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. "You examined our cities and our factories and our military bases, and you concluded that we were primitives who posed no threat." She stepped closer to the trembling High Emissary. "But you only saw what we wanted you to see. The crude warp bubbles, the primitive fusion reactors, the scattered military forces, all of it was a performance designed to make you underestimate us." "Impossible," Torvald whispered. "Your technology. Our technology has been advancing in secret for over a century," Chun interrupted. "We detected your survey probes 60 years ago, and we have been preparing for this moment ever since. Every tour you gave us, every demonstration of your wonderful technology, was another piece of intelligence that we used to develop countermeasures." She pulled a small device from her pocket and held it up. "Your shield harmonics, for example. We cracked them within the first month. Our railguns are already tuned to the exact frequency needed to punch through with minimal resistance. Torvald stared at her with 6 eyes full of horror. You knew everything. We knew enough, Chun said. We knew that you would come with smiles and promises, and we knew that behind those smiles was an empire built on the subjugation of species too weak to resist. We are not too weak, High Emissary. She turned to face the alien observers, raising her voice so that all could hear. Let this serve as humanity's official response to the Volanth Collective. We are not primitives to be uplifted, and we are not resources to be harvested. We are a free people, and we will remain free. Her eyes found the cameras broadcasting the ceremony across collective space. Any species or power that threatens our freedom will discover exactly what humanity is capable of when our survival is at stake. In orbit, the human fleet moved into position around the guidance stations, their weapons charged and ready. The Volanth crews aboard those stations looked at their sensor displays and knew with terrible certainty that everything had changed. Humanity had deceived them completely, and now the truth was revealed. Senior Commander Velkoth stood on the bridge of guidance station 1 and watched his death approach through the darkness of space. The human warships had surrounded all 3 stations in a ring of steel and fire, and every sensor on his display showed the same impossible readings. These were not the primitive vessels his people had surveyed. These were weapons of war built by a species that had been preparing for this moment for generations. His communications officer looked up from his console with terror in his eyes. Commander, I am receiving a transmission from the human flagship. Put it through, Velkoth said. His voice steady despite the fear that gripped his heart's Admiral Chen Wei-Lin appeared on the screen, her face calm and unreadable. Volanth vessels, this is Admiral Chun of the United Earth Defense Force. You are surrounded by superior firepower and have no possibility of escape. I am offering you one chance to stand down and surrender your stations. Peacefully, Velkoth felt a surge of anger cut through his fear. You expect us to surrender to primitives? The Collective has ruled this galaxy for 12,000 years, and we will not bow to a species that was still living in caves when our civilization was young. That is your choice, Chun replied. But I want to be clear about what happens next. If you fire on us, we will destroy every Volanth vessel in this system. If you surrender, your crews will be treated with dignity and return to collective space unharmed. We do not surrender to lesser beings. Velkoth snarled. He turned to his tactical officer. Signal the cruiser squadron. All ships are to target the human flagship and fire on my command. The Volanth cruisers began to move. 12 ships that had been stationed in Earth orbit as an honor guard for the integration ceremony. They were powerful vessels by collective standards, each one capable of destroying a human city. And Velkoth believed that their combined firepower would be enough to break the human formation. He was wrong. All ships, fire, he commanded. The Volanth cruisers unleashed their weapons. Energy beams and plasma torpedoes streaking toward the UEDS Defiance in a storm of destructive power. It was enough firepower to crack a moon. And Velkoth allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he imagined the primitive human ship being torn apart. The satisfaction died when the Defiance did not. The human flagship had raised shields that absorbed the Volanth attack like water absorbing raindrops. The energy beams diffused across a barrier of shimmering light, and the plasma torpedoes detonated harmlessly against a surface that seemed to drink in their fury. Impossible, the tactical officer whispered. Their shields are absorbing everything we throw at them on the human flagship. Admiral Chun watched the Volanth attack wash over her ship's defenses and nodded with grim satisfaction. Shield status? Holding at 97%, her tactical officer reported. Their weapons are exactly as ineffective as our simulations predicted. Then let us show them what real weapons look like, Chun said. All ships weapons free. Target their cruisers and fire at will. The human fleet responded with a fury that the galaxy had never witnessed. The Defiance's main railgun battery spoke first. Magnetic accelerators hurling tungsten projectiles at 3% of the speed of light. The projectiles crossed the distance to the nearest Volanth cruiser in less than a heartbeat. And when they struck the alien shields, they did not stop. The railgun rounds had been tuned to the exact harmonic frequency of Volanth shield technology. A frequency that humanity had spent months analyzing and decoding. They passed through the shields as if they were not there and struck the cruiser's hull with the force of nuclear weapons. The first Volanth ship died in a flash of light and expanding debris. Its crew killed before they even understood what had happened. 3 more cruisers followed in the next 2 seconds, torn apart by railgun fire that their shields could not stop. The human projectiles punched through armor and bulkheads and reactor cores, and each hit was a death sentence. The remaining Volanth ships tried to run, breaking formation and accelerating toward the edge of the system, but the human fleet was faster. Destroyer squadrons cut off their escape routes, and capital ships targeted their engines with precision fire that left them drifting and helpless. Commander Velkos watched his fleet die and felt the cold certainty of defeat settle into his bones. In less than a minute, 8 of his 12 cruisers had been destroyed or disabled, and the humans had not lost a single ship. Cease fire, he ordered, his voice hollow. All ships, cease fire and signal surrender, Commander? His first officer asked with shock in his voice. Look at them, Velkos said, pointing at the display. Look at what they are doing to us. Our weapons cannot touch them, and their weapons cut through our defenses like they do not exist. If we continue to fight, we will all die for nothing. He straightened his uniform and faced the communications console. Open a channel to the human admiral. Chun's face appeared on his screen once more. I am glad you have seen reason, Commander. Order your remaining ships to power down their weapons and prepare to be boarded. You have won this battle, Velkos said, but the collective will not let this stand. There are thousands of worlds and millions of ships that will come to avenge this humiliation. Then they will learn the same lesson you have learned today, Chun replied. Humanity does not seek war with the collective, but we will not accept subjugation. We will defend our freedom against any force that threatens it, no matter how large. The battle, such as it was, had lasted 11 minutes. In those 11 minutes, humanity had destroyed or captured every Volanth warship in the system, seized all 3 guidance stations, and broadcast the entire engagement across every communication frequency the collective used. By the time the last Volanth cruiser surrendered, the footage of their defeat was already spreading across the galaxy. Admiral Chun ordered her ships to secure the surviving Volanth crews and treat them with respect. There would be no cruelty and no revenge. For humanity wanted to send a message that was about more than just military power. This is Admiral Chun Weilin to all collective forces and any species receiving this broadcast, she said, her voice reaching across light years of space. What you have witnessed today is not an act of aggression. It is an act of self-defense. She paused to let her words sink in. The Volanth collective came to our world with promises of protection and partnership. But we know the truth about what integration means. We know that uplifted species become servants and that their resources are stripped away to feed an empire that cares nothing for their freedom. Humanity chooses a different path. We will not be absorbed, we will not be exploited, and we will not bow to any power that demands our submission. Our fleet will defend our territory against any who threaten it, and we will respond to any attack with overwhelming force. But we do not seek empire. We seek only to live as free people among the stars. Any species or government that wishes to deal with humanity as equals will find us to be fair and generous partners. Those who come to us as conquerors will find only destruction." She looked directly into the camera, her eyes hard and steady. "The age of humanity's isolation is over. We are here, we are strong, and we will not be moved. Choose your next actions wisely." In the collective's capital, 12,000 light-years away, the High Council watched the broadcast in stunned silence. For the first time in their long history, they faced a species that had outplayed them completely, and they had no idea what to do about it. 6 months after Integration Day, the galaxy had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. The news of humanity's victory over the Volanth spread across the stars like wildfire, carried by traders and refugees and diplomats who told the story in whispers and shouts. A primitive species had faced the mighty collective and won, not through luck or surprise, but through careful planning and overwhelming force. For the 63 species that the collective had uplifted over the millennia, the news was nothing less than revolutionary. The HFY were the first to act. They had served the collective for 3 centuries, providing labor and resources in exchange for protection they had never truly needed. And when they saw the footage of human warships tearing through Volanth cruisers, something long dormant stirred in their collective soul. Their delegation arrived at Earth within a month, traveling in ships they were not supposed to own to a world they were not supposed to visit. The Volanth had forbidden independent diplomacy among their client species. But the HFY no longer cared about Volanth rules Admiral. Chun received them in the same hall in Geneva, where she had rejected the integration treaty. And the HFY ambassador fell to his knees the moment he saw her. "Please," he said, his voice trembling with hope, "teach us how to be free." Chun helped him to his feet with gentle hands. "We do not teach freedom," she said. "Freedom is something you claim for yourselves. But we can help you find the strength to claim it." In the months that followed, similar delegations arrived from dozens of worlds. The Marth warriors came seeking alliance, their pride restored by the knowledge that submission was not the only option. The Velthan engineers came offering technical knowledge in exchange for protection. The Kresh philosophers came simply to witness the species that had done the impossible. Humanity welcomed them all, not as subjects or servants, but as partners. The United Earth Council established the Free Systems Alliance, an organization built on principles that the Volanth had never understood. Member species retained complete sovereignty over their own worlds, contributed to collective defense only by choice, and were free to leave the alliance at any time without penalty. It was the opposite of everything the collective represented. And species that had known nothing but subjugation for thousands of years wept at the simple promise of self-determination. The Volanth collective, meanwhile, was falling apart. High Emissary Torvan had been stripped of his rank and exiled to a mining colony on the edge of collective space. His failure so complete that his name had become a curse among his people. The High Council that had ruled for 12,000 years fractured into competing factions, each one blaming the others for the catastrophe that had befallen them. Some factions demanded war, calling for the full military might of the collective to descend upon Earth and crush the upstart humans. But cooler heads pointed to the footage from Integration Day and asked a simple question. If one human fleet could destroy 12 cruisers in 11 minutes, what would happen when the collective faced the full strength of Earth's hidden shipyards? Other factions suggested negotiation, arguing that humanity could be appeased with concessions and trade agreements. But the humans had made their position clear, and they were not interested in negotiating terms of surrender. The truth was that the collective did not know how to deal with humanity, because humanity did not fit into any category they understood. The humans were not primitives to be absorbed, not rivals to be crushed, and not threats to be contained. They were something entirely new a year after Integration Day. The Free Systems Alliance had grown to include over 40 worlds, and the collective's client species were abandoning their masters in ever greater numbers. The great empire that had ruled the galaxy for millennia was crumbling from within, not from military defeat, but from the simple idea that freedom was possible. Admiral Chun, who had become the most famous human in the galaxy, traveled to world after world spreading that idea. She visited the Kethvari homeworld and stood before their parliament to speak of self-determination. She addressed the Marth warrior clans and acknowledged their courage. She met with the Velfin elders and promised that their knowledge would never be exploited. Everywhere she went, she carried the same message. "We do not ask you to serve us," she would say. "We do not ask you to fight for us. We ask only that you stand beside us as equals. And together we will build a galaxy where no species has to kneel before another." The former client species responded with enthusiasm that bordered on worship. And Chun had to constantly remind them that humanity was not their new master. "We did not free you from the collective just to enslave you ourselves," she told them. "If you worship us, you have learned nothing. Stand on your own feet and make your own choices. And trust that we will respect those choices, even when we disagree with them." It was a lesson that the galaxy had never learned before. And it changed everything. Torvin, alone in his exile on a distant mining world, eventually requested an audience with the Admiral. He had spent months trying to understand what had happened, and he needed answers that his own people could not provide. Chun agreed to meet him. Traveling across the galaxy to face the fallen High Emissary in a small room with gray walls and no windows. "How?" he asked when she entered, his once proud bearing broken by months of disgrace. "How did you know to deceive us? How did you build so much in secret? How did a species that was throwing rocks a few millennia ago become a power capable of challenging the collective?" Chun sat across from him and considered the question. "You made assumptions about us," she said. "You saw our crude ships and our primitive weapons, and you assumed that we were what we appeared to be. You never asked what we had already survived, the wars and plagues and disasters that should have destroyed us 100 times over." She leaned forward, and Torvan saw in her eyes the steel that had defeated his entire civilization. "Humanity learned long ago that the universe is not kind," she continued. "We have fought for survival since the first of our ancestors climbed down from the trees, and every challenge we have faced has made us stronger. We do not wait for others to save us, and we do not trust those who offer gifts without cost. You saw a primitive species ready to be uplifted," she said. "We saw an empire grown soft and arrogant, so certain of its own superiority that it announced itself to strangers without first checking whether those strangers had teeth." She stood to leave, but paused at the door to deliver one final truth. "Humanity always has teeth, High Emissary. We simply do not show them until we are ready to bite." In the years that followed, the galaxy continued to change. The old order crumbled, and new alliances rose to take its place. And at the center of it all stood humanity, not as conquerors or masters, but as the spark that had ignited a revolution of freedom across the stars. The Free Systems Alliance grew to include over 100 worlds, each one choosing partnership over subjugation. And throughout that vast community of species, a saying spread that captured the truth of what had happened. When the humans arrived, we thought we were being conquered. Instead, we were being freed. And in the halls of power across 1,000 worlds, leaders learned a lesson they would never forget. Never underestimate humanity. They would not make that mistake again.